Hello and welcome to the Klassiki podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary titles, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and much more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe in your app of choice, and remember you can get in touch with us at podcast@klassiki.online. Thank you. This week, we're reopening the Klassiki Kino Club for Season 5 of the show. The Kino Club is our watch-along exploration of Klassiki's ever-expanding catalogue, where we ask a friend of the show to pick a film from our library that they haven't seen before, watch it, and then jump on a call to discuss. In the hot seat this time around is Ali Pitts, host of the long-running Russian and Soviet movies podcast and confirmed Eastern European film aficionado. Ali's choice comes from Azerbaijan, Orkhan Aghazadeh's 2024 documentary The Return of the Projectionist, a portrait of cinephilia and friendship across generations. Ali and I got into Aghazadeh's playful blend of observation and performance, the state of cinema in the post-Soviet space, and how to make a nostalgic film without being sentimental. Hopefully you'll feel inspired to check out the film and to start exploring our library yourselves. So follow the links in the show description to watch along with us on Klassiki and to check out Ali's Russian and Soviet movies podcast. And send us a message at podcast@klassiki.online to let us know what films you'd like us to cover next on the Kino Club. Ali, thanks for joining us on the Klassiki podcast for another edition of our Kino Club.
Thanks very much for having me, Sam.
It's been too long. It's a collaboration long in the offing.
Indeed.
So you plumped for when I asked you to pick a film you hadn't seen from the Klassiki library. And I should say I wasn't sure that there was going to be a film that you hadn't seen from the Klassiki library because I know you're a big fan.
I am, but the library's getting increasingly capacious, so you didn't have to worry on that score.
Well, thank you, if that is a compliment. And anyway, when I asked you what film you had in mind, you went for quite a recent addition to the library and quite a recent film, which is The Return of the Projectionist by the Azerbaijani director Orkhan Aghazadeh. Yeah, first of all, as I usually start these episodes, I'll just ask you why that film? Why is that the one you went for?
Sure. So I think it was a combination of factors. The title pulled me in because I remember seeing that popping up on like the browse option. I was like, making a mental note, I'll definitely have to come back to that. So that kind of gave me the prompt that I needed to act on that like bit of curiosity. And then I guess curiosity and interest in documentary as a genre, which we can get into later, and also just in the post-pandemic times being a bit more conscious of cinema going as this really special thing and seeing films with an audience and increasingly not taking it for granted. Just this kind of like curiosity about the more analog past that I was sort of grew up with, but was already passing away.
Yeah,
as I transitioned from like adolescence to adulthood, I guess.
So okay, let's just give a brief kind of synopsis of the film. Like you say, This is a documentary, although it's pushing at the limits of documentary. We can definitely get into that in a sec. And it's set in a region of Azerbaijan near to the border with Iran, called Talish, a region with its own language and cultural traditions. And we're in a remote mountainous village. And the kind of protagonist, the titular projectionist, is a retired man named Samid, Samid in Soviet times was the projectionist who kind of serviced the various film houses, what were called houses of culture in the Soviet Union, that were dotted around these various remote mountain villages. Of course, these have long since shut down, and Samid gets by kind of doing odd jobs repairing people's televisions. And the narrative through line is that through a kind of burgeoning friendship and creative collaboration with a teenager he meets called Ayaz, who is creating these strange handmade animations and films shot on his mobile phone. Samid kind of has his love for cinema and film projection rekindled, and kind of embarks on this odyssey to somehow find a way to screen a 35mm print of a film for his tiny mountain village. And we follow as Samid and Ayaz kind of jump through all the various hoops and overcome the hurdles on the way to doing that. So that's the premise. Given that you just watched this for the first time, what was your immediate reaction?
So I found it quite a slow burn to begin with. One thing that really struck me early on was the the framing is gorgeous,
It certainly is.
and you alluded to this earlier, being slightly confused just because I was like, I had it in my head that this was a documentary, but this feels more like a fiction film, and we can get into that more. So that was something that really stood out at me. And then having found that the film was kind of like pottering around along quite prettily, but like not really grabbing my attention, suddenly it pounced on me when
Mm.
we get into um, Samid's tragic family situation. The fact that he lost his son when his son was, I think it's, I mean,
I think
losing
it's a few years ago,
a few
but yeah,
years
his son
ago.
was
Yes,
a young adult, relatively.
yes,
Died in a construction site accident.
yeah. And the film, I don't recall whether it is super specific or whether it implies, but it certainly implies that there was like workplace negligence. So there's a sort of like it's the extra. It's not just a tragedy that happened; it was an avoidable tragedy, and
Yeah.
that kind of adding to the horror of that, and so that angle just really, as I say, pounced on me and was just like, oh, this suddenly packs a punch. Um,
Yeah, and that obviously then reframes the dynamic of this relationship that he's developing with this teenage boy. And yeah, I agree. I think there's a sequence in the middle of the film where we're largely kind of, like I say, up in this remote mountain region in southern Azerbaijan, and then there's this sequence where Samid leaves to go to Baku, to the capital, and it's not explained. There's no voiceover or anything like that, and it almost becomes quite a kind of surreal sequence. He's meeting with these young men who we kind of realize were his son's friends and colleagues. He takes a swim in the Caspian Sea, and it's quite this very quiet sequence. It's actually quite extended, and it really changes the tone. It does that thing that films do sometimes, where they're able to kind of reorient our understanding of what we've already seen up to that point.
and it's a really confident approach of just going like, we're not going to do something really dramatic in terms of our editorial choices early on to hook you in. We're just gonna trust you to be patient, and then we'll let the the character, well, the characters, and that's a whole thing to get into, but this the heart of the story emerge rather than going like, grabbing you by the lapels and going, "This is exciting," which some films do.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we can get now into this slippery question of the format of it as documentary, because what's interesting about it is that we kind of see Samid and Ayaz meeting one another. We see that happening, as it were, live, and we see that relationship develop. And that was my first, as I was watching it, that was my first clue that this was not going to be in any way a kind of straight observational documentary. There's clearly an element of staging here, and like as you say, as the film goes on, some of the master shots, some of the perspectives they're able to find on these scenes that are apparently kind of unfolding organically in front of them, you think, hang on, there's no way that you can be this lucky cinematographically over and over. And I spoke to Orkhan about the film, and we'll put the link for that interview, which is on Klassiki, in the description underneath this show. And I asked him, how did this happen? And basically, he described it himself as a docufiction or a hybrid documentary. They had a certain number of shooting days that they had. And so they didn't really have time to just kind of, in that classic observational style, sit and wait for things to evolve. So they weren't necessarily directing the action, but they would ask, say, Samid, okay, what are you doing today? And if he said, oh, I'm going to this person's house, e.g., then they would find a way to set up a nice, beautiful framing shot of the house, and then they would kind of let the action play out within it. So it's not properly staged in the sense of a fiction film, but it's definitely not. We're not seeing things evolve organically. Like this was created in collaboration with the people that we're seeing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your interview with Aghazadeh. I think I'm really glad I watched that before I had this conversation, because it kind of straightened some stuff out for me. That was just like, I'm kind of confused about this. But I kind of love that docufiction angle, because it being one of these films about films, it feels like a very knowing kind of look back to the history of documentary as a genre, because of course Robert Flaherty and him being one of the early pioneers, and things like Nanook of the North, and that having scenes that were staged and did involve I mean, probably in that context, perhaps like quite a paternalistic, like, now go and do this thing, and there being a power dynamic thing. But that's, we're not talking about Nanook of the North, but just the fact that it harks back to documentary as a construction, and in some cases, and removing it from the kind of documentaries that have this the appearance of objectivity and this sort of voice of authority, like the sort of classic BBC or like public service broadcasting, like, we are telling you the facts. This is more interesting than that. And
yeah, but I guess what's important about it is that it's led by the material, and it's led by the people. So it is like allowing this relationship between Samid and Ayaz, and it's allowing their quest to get this film screen to kind of play out. But also allowing for this kind of intervention to help create this, I don't know, this aesthetically appealing, emotionally engaging story. I think it's very successful in doing that. I guess one thing that I really appreciate about the film, and maybe this just speaks to my own interests, but what comes across really well is it's definitely a film about the kind of post-Soviet condition in the post-Soviet space. I mean, post-Soviet is a term that's almost always too vague for the
Mm.
context in which it's used, and a lot of people quite rightly think its usefulness is expired. But this is absolutely a film about the kind of forced removal of a kind of cultural and social life, and then the attempt to revive it. Because, yeah, we don't need to relitigate this, but whatever you say about the Soviet Union, they did have these. Samid was employed as a projectionist, and there were these houses of culture that were screening films for these incredibly remote communities. And that infrastructure just does not exist, will not exist, and does not exist in this kind of post-Soviet capitalist Azerbaijan. And I find that the film doesn't stress that too much. It never really kind of certainly doesn't make a political point about it. But it's absolutely like this play with nostalgia, but in a very non-judgmental way. I think is really, really valuable, especially for like a country like Azerbaijan, and then even a region within a country like Azerbaijan that we would not usually really kind of consider in these conversations.
No, I think I see it in a similar way. Yeah, it because that break was so abrupt that there were, and again, you don't want to look at the Soviet Union with like rose-tinted glasses, but there were things that people who grew up in the system liked about it that like this, like their approach to cinema that suddenly went away with the change and people didn't really have a say in that. And this thing that was part of their lives that they liked, it's just like, well, that's not happening anymore. And so you can understand why people wish it could be different or wish they could have some of that back. Um,
Yeah, you see it in the film, don't you? Because obviously the older people in the village who remember the days when Samid was projecting these films for them have one kind of reaction, and then there's also this very interesting phenomenon of the children in the village, who are obviously entirely post-Soviet subjects, having a slightly different but also kind of engaged reaction to what's going on, which I think is really interesting. I'm just looking at I get tooting my own trumpet again, but that this interview with Orkhan, just on this question of what happened when that Soviet infrastructure fell into disrepair, he describes it as life becoming flat, which I think is quite an interesting way of putting it. And then about that older generation, he kind of asks this question, this rhetorical question of whether or not we can call them cinephiles. And he says that he's not sure, because for him it's more to do with them having an interest in a different kind of life, by which he means a communal experience that was removed from them. And which you said at the beginning, I think this is something people are thinking about now. Like, there's this, people are reckoning with the idea that the communal experience of cinema might be disappearing, even if you don't live in a remote Azerbaijani village.
yeah, or that it's becoming like increasingly at the risk of editorializing, like quite stratified. Like if you live in a population center that's has a critical mass of people with some disposable income, you can have nice things like a cinema which has good curation. But if you're somewhere that's been one of to use the risk of using an overused phrase, like left behind places, it's like, well, you might want that, but you don't have the choice because it's a long drive to the nearest cinema, multiplex, and multiplexes maybe have had their day as well. So, because I mean, some of my interest in this is growing up in Milton Keynes, which was the first place in the UK to have a multiplex cinema, which now that building is probably going to be demolished and has like quite a sort of forlorn aspect to it that reminds me of places in the former Soviet Union that I visited and have seen. To go off on a tangent, a documentary I've really enjoyed on Klassiki recently is the Soviet bus stops
Ah,
doc,
yes.
which has, I don't know, thematic overlaps with this one, I would say. Like,
Oh, definitely, yeah.
yeah, very different protagonists, but yeah, definitely the sort of the at the risk of being simplistic, it wasn't all bad. There were some, there were some like quirks that were good.
Well, I think it's more a question of how historical, like how the kind of evolving historical context
Mm.
changes one understanding of different things over time, isn't it? It's yeah. I mean, I don't. Again, we're not. I hate to break it to you, Ali. We're not going to uh, relitigate the Soviet Union on this particular episode of the Klassiki
I was
podcast.
desperate to solve it. I was
Yeah.
desperate to solve it in like the 35 minutes that or so that we have available. But disappointment is a big underlying, to current of the film. Like, but that kind of mixture of disappointment, but kind of still persisting nevertheless. Like the the the
What do you mean? What do you mean
the
by that exactly? Disappointment, as in
well, as in
Samid's kind of reduced and restricted horizons, or
I think it's quite multifaceted because just it like the bigger things of life the grief angle again, but just in terms of trying to drum up interest in this screening and the sort of maybe ambivalent is too harsh, but the like waveringly supportive attitude of the local community that's kind of initially like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and then when they're waiting for the bulb to arrive in the projector, that this just kind of like you've been talking about this for ages and it's still not happening, and like the local official going, can you please take the posters down? And looking a bit tatty. I mean, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but just that sort of yeah, I mean the fragility and the fact that this scheme that he has and this project that he's been working on and Ayaz has been supporting him with and encouraging his enthusiasm of just might not happen after all. So and then that kind of links in with Ayaz's project because there's definitely disappointment, fragility is both
yeah,
on the grand scale and the smaller scale is definitely a big theme of this.
yeah. I mean, I guess we should say that a large stretch of the film is basically all about whether or not this bulb for the projector that they've hired from Lithuania, I think, will arrive. Um,
Mm.
and if so, in what condition will it be? And so that's the high tightrope of suspense that we're walking for a lot of the film. And like you say, kind of the screening gets delayed and so on. But it's I mean, you're right to say that there is this anyone who's ever put a screening on at a cinema and tried to convince all their friends to turn up will recognize this. There is this element of anxiety about whether there still is this interest in the community for this kind of communal experience. But then at the same time, there's a lot of very touching stuff to do. The people do come together. There's a sequence where a lot of the kind of elderly women in the village are giving him their spare sheets so they can kind of stitch them together into a giant screen to hang in the village hall. There's a great sequence where he kind of has to ask the local kind of religious elders whether they think he should censor any of the material in the film that they're screening. And in practice, and this was, I think, I mean, this is what Orkhan told me happened during Soviet times as well. The censoring would be done by, the projectionist literally holding his hands over the beam of the projector at the moments where there was, I don't know, a sex scene or some graphic violence, just to prevent people from seeing it, which
Oh,
is a nice bit of analog entertainment.
yes, and intervention and because there is this kind of low key kind of like wry melancholic humor about the whole thing, and that scene particularly, like with the like impromptu censorship, I loved that because it recalled to me a favorite film of mine, um uh Elem Klimov's debut, Welcome or No Trespassing, which
Oh yeah.
alas not on Klassiki at the moment, for reasons, I'm sure. Yeah, that and for anyone who only knows Klimov for Come and See, like just seek that film out. It's so funny and so life affirming, but it does have this cinema sequence where we have some impromptu censorship that is basically exactly what happens in Return of the Projectionist, which yeah,
I had I
it,
that I had forgotten that. That's a great shout, great parallel. I'd forgotten that. What did you make of the relationship between Samid and Ayaz? I'm not sure we've really got into that
mm,
yet. I mean, it is the heart of the film. It is what produces that. It's like that catalyst that produces this kind of storyline in the first place. And it does kind of change over time, and there are moments of quite heated conflict and resolution and so on. How did you react to that particular kind of central aspect of the film?
yeah, I think you're right. It is like it's what gives the film so much of its like emotional heart. And I don't like using the word heartwarming,
Mm.
but it is really lovely to see two people from with such an age gap being a source of inspiration to each other, and that growth of not even grudging respect, but just kind of like challenging of assumptions about each other's generation, because the whole frequently old people having this kind of idea of young people, oh, they don't know they're born, blah 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 blah, and young people going like, oh, you know, such and such is like a boring old fart or whatever, and they the reality of the actual person in front of each of them challenges, not that it explicitly goes into any of those stereotypes at all, but just these stereotypes are like abroad in the world and have been for a very long time. So the fact that you see them overcoming this like generational gap, because of their shared interest, I really it as I say, it's lovely. I really liked it.
Yeah, it's Samid really kind of throws himself into it with seeming no questions asked when he's kind of helping Ayaz make these weird little films about the Russian invasion of Ukraine that are kind of satirical and absurdist. And it's kind
Mm.
of again, you'd really struggle when I was writing about this film. When we were bringing it onto Klassiki, I was again trying to avoid the word heartwarming because it's such a turn off, and I think the film
Mm.
does avoid sentimentality. That's maybe the most impressive thing about it, because it would be so easy. I'm sure people who've listened to this conversation could very easily be imagining a very schmaltzy, self-satisfied kind of love letter to cinema.
Mm.
But it really does manage to avoid sentimentality. Like you say, there's a lot in there that's about anxiety and frustration and delay, and there's a whole really kind of touching treatment of grief as well. So I think that may be the most impressive thing about it. It's like a film about nostalgia that isn't sentimental, which I think is quite uncommon.
Mm. And on the point of about the filmmaker's sensitivity, I I really appreciated that for the scene on the hillside, where Samad is visiting his son's grave. The filmmaker actually, gives him quite a lot of space, and it's not like right up close, like observing all of like the facial details or whatever.
Mm.
He's actually giving him that respect. I mean, we do get sound. You can tell he's crying, but it's not like look, be moved by this. It's more respectful than that, which, yeah, again, it's great sensitivity.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, but this is a film that's very rewarding and would reward several rewatches and reveal a lot more over time in that way. So I think we'll leave it there for now, for this edition of the Kino Club. And yeah, encourage everyone to go and check out this film and check out our interview with Orkhan Aghazadeh, which I think really kind of opens it up even further. But Ali Pitts, thanks so much for taking the time to discuss this film with me.
Thanks very much for having me on and bringing me to the film club. I really appreciate it.